Mustache Tales.
Yeah!
It's always weird when you connect with an old friend and they're going through like something not great. But I feel like after not talking for a couple months, it really brought us closer.
It's true. You mean the actual health scare thing?
Well, when I talked to you when you were in the hospital,
Yeah.
it's like, God, I didn't want to talk to you like that after a long time.
I
but
know.
It really, it like made me realize how much I miss you and love you, dude. And I'm happy you're better.
See, now, from my perspective, imagine having that same realization about you and also about family members and also about several other friends. So for me, and I know this is crazy and we're like diving right in here, but that sort of incident being in the hospital, I had an infection, everyone. I went sepsis. If you've never done it, I don't recommend it physically, but spiritually, it was incredible.
Was it through something of your own fault, like bad hygiene or some sort of something you can go, well, I shouldn't have done that?
No, unfortunately, It remains somewhat mysterious how this like random bacteria got into my bloodstream. It was like a freak occurrence. It's actually
it was
part of the trouble with it is like having been in the hospital. It's like you want goddamn answers. You know what I mean? Like you want to know exactly what happened and you want to avoid it happening again. And I had to like come to terms with the fact that they're not going to figure it out. I have a great internist, a doctor who told me like, listen, we know you had an infection and they found the right antibiotics to make it go away. And you got to leave it at that.
And then I got the call, Jay, and I was very worried. But the intention, so what I found out was he's going to be okay, but he's just he's fighting it right now. So my intention when I called Jason after not having talked to him for a long time.
In the hospital.
In the hospital.
Yeah.
I was just essentially delivering the message. I was like, hey, man, don't be a pussy. Keep fighting.
Yeah, and that's what
I was like, you got this, dude.
That's
Keep
what I
fighting.
expected. But like, I want to go back to the idea of why, like, we had not disconnected, but hadn't talked in a while in the first place. Because that wasn't just with you, as far as I was concerned. Like, for me, what the pandemic did is like, and this is true, I've talked to a lot of dudes about this. My wife, she tripled down on all of her relationships. During that time when we were all isolated from each other, she made phone calls. She was on like all these apps, like finding new technological ways to connect.
Your wife and I became very close during the pandemic. I didn't even know her, and she's reaching out. I'm like, yeah, great. Sure.
Yeah, that's what I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. She went outward, and I went inward. And it's true of like a lot of guys. And look, it's true of my brother. My brother and I, we have the same DNA. We had the same reaction. We kind of like retracted. And I found myself, even though when the world kind of recovered and we started to go back to normal and started to do our normal things, like I didn't do any like work to recover those connections. I just was existing in my world and my life with those connections having been sort of, that severed is the wrong word, but I don't know, receded. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I think it also fits. Well, when I first met you, and we'll get into this story a while ago, you've changed a lot as a person. Like you're just so much more gregarious and externalized. But when we first met, I remember the foundation of our relationship in our 20s was you were scared of everything and I wasn't.
Yes.
Right. And then you overcame that. We actually we told a story about it, which was called The Adventures of Big Handsome Guy and His Little Friend. And it was a short film that we made based on our friendship, like our true friendship when we were hanging out and going out all the time and in LA, kind of in that what was like the movie? Like it was like the swingers scene, those bars, like 3 of Clubs and St. Nick's. And so Jason and I made this short film and we shot it on Super 16, which was a big step in your career, Jason, because you had been a photographer and doing a bunch of improv comedy and writing. But like that's when you really stepped into the director's chair with this. And there's so many stories about this film we made, but we ended up making the same story that we did that was 17 minutes long that we made for $24,000. We ended up, after years of going to film festivals with it and shopping it around, we ended up making a network television pilot based on the short film. So we made something for millions of dollars that we had made for thousands of dollars. And my big takeaway for that story was we shot a scene. So I'm taller than Jason. And The Adventures of Big Handsome Guy, the opening shot that Jason had conceived of was us coming over this hill, which was Angel's Flight in downtown LA. And so it's a hill that you could see us both coming up over, and the Los Angeles is in the background. So it's very dramatic. And we wanted to have a bunch of pigeons scatter as we were coming over the hill. Like, what did we call it? Like a John Woo shot. And when we made this short film, we just happened to be in the park at 6 a.m. shooting these two guys coming over the hill, and there was a homeless guy in the park, and we gave him like $10 and asked him to scatter some breadcrumbs right at the crest of the hill, so that when you saw us come over, first you'd see my head, and the pigeons just went like they filled the screen with all these birds.
It was epic.
It was epic.
It was in slow motion, and The essential bit in that moment with the bird scattering and the dramatic entrance was, we played The Who, and the big scream happens right in that moment, right? And Hayes' character crushes a Red Bull can and tosses it over his shoulder, just littering viciously. And my character stares at him with disdain and confusion. And it's like, you animal. And this is all in slow motion, mind you, as the birds are scattering. And I am forced to go back and pick up his litter and throw it away on his behalf. And in slow motion and in that moment, with The Who playing, it encapsulated a repeatable comedic dynamic between Hayes' character and my character. And we didn't know it at the time we made it, but that repeatable comedic dynamic is the basis of all series comedy television.
And as it became a series or a pilot, it ended up being, we recreated that exact same shot for the network pilot that cost millions of dollars. And so
the network president was like, I have to have that shot. I know we're redoing the pilot, but you guys got to do that same shot.
So we found ourselves like a year and a half later standing in the same location, shooting the same scene, the same opening, but this time with, hundreds of trucks and wardrobe departments and lighting cranes and everything. And it was surreal. I looked at these two pigeon wranglers. So now instead of a homeless guy spreading breadcrumbs, there were two professional pigeon wranglers with cages of birds that they were going to release on cue as we came over the hill. And I looked down at one of the guys who's like hunched, hiding behind that so the camera can't see him. And I go, I'm just curious, how much are you guys getting paid? How much does this gag cost? And the guy goes, $20,000. I go, we made the whole short film.
And Jay, to be clear, once they release the pigeons fly home.
It's one take?
They're homing pigeons. That's how they train pigeons. So it was one take. When we did it, with the birds that were in the park, we got a bunch of takes. So at the end of the day, the short film costs about $20,000. The pilot version of the short film cost $3.5 million. The short film that was $20,000 was 17 minutes. The pilot version was 22 minutes, cost $3.5 million. And at the end of the day, the show didn't get picked up because the network liked the short film better. And that, by the way, is literally everything about that. I didn't direct. I directed the short film, but I didn't direct the pilot version of it, because at that point, the only thing I had ever directed was the short film.
Right.
And
why would they give you the chance to do that?
Especially since Hayes and I were co-writing the pilot. We were executive producers on the pilot.
But you were not in it either.
We were also in it.
No, we were in it.
Oh, you were in it?
Yes.
Oh,
so that was plenty, right? That was plenty.
Right.
But not directing the pilot that they didn't like as much ended up being like the greatest thing that ever happened to my career, because they looked at it and said, we should have let that kid direct the pilot. That was their takeaway.
But it also, I mean, we'll go into all the great stuff you've done too, Jason, but it's also, it showed you as somebody who could deliver a product that looks amazing and great, but didn't have to, at that time, have the production value to do that. I think Always Sunny in Philadelphia was like a predecessor to what we were trying to do, where they made that show for not a lot of money based on a short film, and it became a great series. And it was at that shift where you could start doing that stuff.
What was the year that this thing was finished?
2005.
Your short.
2005.
Oh, 2005.
Well, 2005 was the network.
Was the network version?
I think it was 2000. Yeah, a couple years before that.
Because I met you guys at the Cat and the Fiddle. And somehow, I mean, I can see how it happened. You brought up this short film.
We probably couldn't stop talking about it.
Then I think, Hayes, you ran out to your car and got a copy of it, which could have been on VHS, could have been on DVD. I don't remember. But I'm like, okay, I'll watch it. And then I watch it. I'm like, this thing's fucking pretty good. And I don't.
Here's the poster for it, because I found it before. They have screen versions.
Wow. That's awesome.
Says, some friendships last a lifetime, others just feel like it.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, that gets to the basis of what Hayes was saying before. And Jay, I'm curious about your impression of the film to whatever extent you remember it, but it was based on, I'll tell you where the idea for the film came from. At the time, I had been, believe it or not, like a somewhat successful actor insofar as I was making my living that way, which is like what I thought was the dream, right?
Like Van
Wilder, amongst other things, many commercials, a lot of beer commercials, some sneaker commercials and so forth. At the time, you could make a good living doing all that. You can't anymore. It's part of the way the world has changed that we can all collectively lament. But I realized that wasn't going to fulfill me creatively, and I wanted to make a film. I wanted to direct something. I had at Northwestern studied acting, writing, and photography without realizing that combining those things was essentially directing. I was never like that, like Spielberg at 6 years old, like making movies of my trains. I didn't think that was like, I didn't really know of directing as a pursuit. It was just
it takes a lot of nuts to kind of go, I'm going to be a director.
Yeah.
It's like, are you?
Yeah.
Oh, are you?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I'm going to be in charge of all these people and this budget. All the money is going to be like essentially under my control, and the vision is mine, and I'm going to tell everybody where to go. Yeah, it takes a while. It took me a while to exactly have the balls to say it should be me. What about you, Jay?
Well, I was an actor in high school and college, and I did a lot of I did dramas, I did tons of musicals and comedies, right? But I was getting laughs, and I was like, I want to try to be an actor after I graduate. But I'm like looking at the movie and television screens, and there were no actual Indians on them except for Ben Kingsley. And, the way that Gandhi ended, they weren't going to make a number 2, right? And so I was like, I'm not going to get in that one. So I was like, and the only Indians they had were they were probably Jewish guys in brownface.
Oh, boy.
doing great accents. I thought Peter Sellers was fantastic. I thought, Fisher Stevens, whose real name is Stephen Fisher. I thought he was pretty good too. And my dad loved that performance in Short Circuit too. But I was like, the only way I'm going to get onto those screens. I mean, I knew I could probably get on selling Brad Pitt a pack of cigarettes before he went and fucked Jennifer Aniston. But I'm like, I want to fuck Jennifer Aniston. And so I was like, the only way I'm going to get on those screens is if I write my own stuff and insert an Indian guy with my accent in the middle of the movie, and then look around and go, I don't know, who should we get to play it? Like that was my fucking plan. And we had this guy direct some shorts we were doing sketches in New York, and one of them caught fire and Comedy Central wanted to make it. And we had an Australian director direct the shorts. They were called Dante's Levels of Hell, whatever. And he did a good job, but the way he cut it was rhythmically different than the way we had intended it.
Right.
And we were like, I mean, there were a million things I wanted to adjust, and he was the director. Fine. He did a good job. But after that, I'm like, there's no way we can do this again. We can't be interpreted by somebody else. Like, the music of our comedy is in here and in us.
Yes.
And the only way to get that is to do it ourselves.
Yes.
And so I ended up becoming the director out of that necessity.
It was not dissimilar. And perhaps, I don't know, hindsight, but perhaps if I had the balls earlier to insist that I should have directed the big budget pilot. But I actually don't think, I think a similar thing. I think the director did a decent job. For me, it was more a lesson about the corrupting influence of money.
Yeah.
Because Hayes told that story about the birds, which is a very funny example of how the money goes through the roof. But what happened on the screen was that because we had more time, the director shot more coverage. Because we had more coverage, there were more singles. With all of those singles, everybody could control the cut and the edit and the rhythm. Yeah. And just like you're saying, Hayes and my natural comedic rhythm kind of went away. But more than that, in the singles and the way we were presented, the feeling of chemistry that the audience got from the short, which was shot in very little time with very little money and therefore very little coverage, the short had lots of shots with the two of us simply existing in the same frame out of necessity. But now I realize that is exactly how the audience perceives chemistry. And so going forward, as I've directed stuff, this core lesson has been the basis of so much of what I've directed going forward. Every pilot I've done, I've picked a moment where I'm like, this moment between these two characters is really humming. I'm going to shoot it in such a way that it must exist uncut in the pilot. And I'm going to do that by mistakenly failing to shoot coverage for this point.
You actually do that?
I do that I've done that in every single pilot. Because I know at the end of the day, it's that the perception is you need characters existing in the same frame for chemistry. And I hide it in all sorts of different ways. It's not exactly always about parking on a static two-shot. Sometimes it's about trading from this to that, or it's about a pan or a move or whatever. But the fact is, it's still an uncut moment where you feel the real chemistry of the actors existing in the frame. And I'm very judicious about it. I'm not looking to screw anybody by doing this, but I also know that it's like for the good of the project, I have to push all my chips to the center of the table on a particular moment.
It's funny. I am constantly telling actors, I'm like, we can shoot these singles and I can create the rhythm I want. Or you guys were hired for a reason. So create your own comedic rhythm, but, be careful with your pauses, because if you violate my comedic rhythm, I'm going to fucking cut it. So I try to create 6, 8, 10 lines of two shots, or I'm always trying to create that. And but I always cover it, but you're right that it's dangerous to cover it because somebody more powerful can come in and be like snip, snip, snip. Right?
Yep. That's right.
Well, the overlap too is so important.
Yeah.
I mean, here we are having a 3-person conversation. We kind of know when there's a flow when we come in and when we come out. But when you get to see all of us talk at the same time, that's the chemistry, right? Like it's the flow and the bits. And when it's like, especially with jokes, when you see a joke coming, when you're on somebody's face, you know they're going to deliver a piece of information. You're already ahead of it.
Right.
But in the 2-shot, it's a surprise. But the way we got money for that short film is also another great story, Jason. So do you remember there were multiple things we did, but
all of it honestly goes back to the dynamic between Hayes and me. Like that's what the short film is based on. It's based on the difference and every story behind the scenes making the film echoes the comedic dynamic that the film itself is based on. So just to explain that dynamic just a little further, you mentioned it earlier about like the way I saw it was like Hayes is a guy at 6'5", handsome, charming, incredibly charmed life and upbringing, such that he did not understand worry at that time in his life. Now he's had children. He's been through some shit. He's maybe a more rounded human being. But at the time, he literally, the concept of neuroses, of having anxiety, of worrying about the outcome of something, literally was foreign to him. But he has such a good heart that he actually approached my neuroses with curiosity and generosity. Just genuinely asking the question, why would you worry about that? And that curiosity to me was so hilarious. Like the idea that there could be this creature, this human being who had led such a charmed life as the quarterback of the football team, that he literally didn't understand why somebody might worry about this common everyday thing. So, in preparation for this, I listened to another episode. I listened to the one with your brother, Hayes.
Yeah.
Scotty told the story about being at the Ducks game in the Blackhawks jersey and walking out and asking what the score was and like rubbing it in and basically asking for a fight. And that story struck me as being at the heart of this dynamic. Hayes, it's hilarious and lovable. And Hayes, for that bit, was willing to be punched in the face. But what he didn't understand at that time in his life is that I never had the luxury of that bit. I'm 5'4". I can't do that bit for fun. I would have died. And not only that, looking at the life through that lens, Hayes would have survived that punch in the face, and he knew it. He knew it. That's a luxury to understand that you literally have to. I didn't have the option to wear the away team jersey. I could never do that.
Well, I mean, Hayes also, by the way, I mean, his brother Scotty is he's shorter for sure, and I'm both of us were put into danger here, by his routine. Yeah, like the first guys are going to go after the smaller guys, right?
Yeah,
like we're the fucking guys.
Yeah,
it's like
Go on, Hayes.
That is true. You only know what you know.
Right.
And that was the foundation of just everything. It was us trying to bring out these different sides of each other. And we did it through experience, like going up to try to get into a bar when there was a line around the block. And Jason's like, we can't, and this is like real life. Like, well, this is crazy. I don't want to be here. Like, what are we doing here? This is like, and I'd go, no, we're just going right up to the front. Like no girls with us, no, nothing. No, like, I'm not going to give the guy money or anything. We're just going to go up and talk to the guy, see if we could have a connection. And then it would work and we would get in. And I'd be like, what were you worried about? Like, why did you look at it like that?
And this dynamic, this is the story you're going to tell behind the scenes in terms of raising money for it. This dynamic is what we wrote about in the short film. And by the way, I guess I've seen this kind of dynamic. It's like but not as best friends. You've seen it as rivals. And the seed of the short came from a moment that our friendship had developed, and this curiosity about each other had developed over a series of like hangout nights in Los Angeles. But it was like cemented at one party where we hadn't seen each other in a while, and we hugged. And at 6'5", Hayes hugging a 5'4" gentleman looked strange. You know, our bodies formed like an odd parallelogram, and people looked askance as we hugged, you know? And so I was thinking about that hug. Yeah, I was in traffic and thinking about that hug, and the title popped into my head, The Adventures of Big Handsome Guy and His Little Friend. And I called Hayes and I was like, I think there's something to that. I think maybe we should like make a short film or something. And Hayes' response was, oh, we're doing that. I'm going to be at your house 4:00 today. We're going to start writing. And see, that's in and of itself, that's the dynamic, because I would have ruminated on it. I would have wrung my hands about it. I might not have taken action. And I'm forever grateful to Hayes for that worldview, him hearing that, saying, that's a good idea, and I'll be at your house at 4 to start writing it.
And then there was the Friars Club stand-up comedy competition, which was I was doing stand-up around LA, and we had a great group of friends. We still do, Jason and I, and they all came out to support. This was the finals. So there was a series of stand-up nights that had led to, if you passed each night, you'd end up at the Friars Club doing a stand-up comedy competition. And there were great people in this stand-up competition. And, you know, Andy Samberg was doing really funny stuff, not just with Lonely Island, but he was doing stand-up at the time. And so there may be like 10 of us at the Friars Club, packed room. I'm not saying I had the best set of the group, but I ended up winning the stand-up comedy competition, which had a monetary prize. And the idea was, once we got the money, we were going to put it into the film. You know, it was a couple $1,000s to get us started. So I did my set, and unbeknownst to me, I felt really good because I won the prize money and stuff. And then I found out later that maybe it was a very close vote, Jay, like a presidential election close, you know? And I found out that one of the reasons I had won was Jason had gone around the room and had told people the best way to vote in order for me to win. You said you don't, because it was like a weighted thing. You're supposed to put first, second, third person on your ballot. But Jason, what was it? It was like, don't put the person that you think is the second best, because then they'll get the points. It was like
all of our friends. Yes, all of our friends put. I maybe had talked about a strategy where we put Hayes first and then judge who's the worst and put them after that, because the rest of the room is going to be voting for the people that were actually good. It's coming back to me now.
Yeah. We haven't told these stories in years, but I remember when I got the check, I got the cash, the envelope of cash. I was like, Jason, we're going out tonight. And he said, no, we're not. This is the money for our film. And we went down to the SAG-AFTRA credit union and opened a bank account.
Wow.
And all the money we put in there was went towards a film.
Regular Matt and Ben.
So
that's incredible.
So wait, I want to talk about all the stuff you've done, Jason, but based on this, we talked about The Adventures of Big Handsome Guy and His Little Friend, which was very, very small. Talk about the steps that then led to directing something very, very big, which was Modern Family, the TV show that ran for years, and how that came together, and because I think there was Giants of Radio before that. You had done similar things that led you to directing the pilot and the episodes of Modern Family.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I didn't direct the big budget adaptation of Big Handsome Guy, and the studio felt that maybe they should have let me. And out of that feeling came an offer to direct something else. And what they wanted me to do was do another, what they called presentation, not quite a full pilot. They were going to give me a small amount of money. Well, what was in their estimation a small amount of money. But bear in mind, we made Big Handsome Guy for $20,000. So I had this big meeting. I had an idea. I had written a full pilot script at that point for this thing called Giants of Radio, which was essentially like 30 Rock, but at a radio conglomerate, a Clear Channel style conglomerate where there were 3 different radio shows within the show. Okay. So, and I wanted to do it in a semi-improvised style because I wasn't that good a writer. So I was
and
always,
you came up through the Improv Olympic.
That's right. I came up through improv. I was in the Meow Show at Northwestern. And my cast stayed together after college. Studied with Del Close at Improv Olympic in Chicago, and that really was my grad school in many ways.
Yeah.
And so I had an improv background and sort of wanted to apply that. And so what I did is I wrote a very structured, very much like what would become the methodology for Curb Your Enthusiasm, a very detailed, structured outline off of which talented improvisers would improvise the scenes.
You got to end up here. You got to start here.
We got to hit these beats even but we're going to play inside of that. And so the studio said, we're going to give you we like this idea. We don't understand your methodology, but whatever. This is a small amount of money. And I was like, how much?
They like to stew. That was like when they stew over every word and every line and every comma and slug. Like this was like, on a network level, like, okay, go do it that way.
And they said, we're not giving you enough money to compete with the broadcast pilots of the world. So definitely do not shoot the whole thing. Just give us a little bit. And I was like, okay, how much are you giving me? And they're like, nothing, $150,000. And my eyes went wide and I was like, my last thing was $20,000. And it was 17 minutes. Why can't I do a 22-minute pilot for $150,000? And so I decided to take their don't do the whole thing as a challenge rather than a mandate. And I did the whole thing. I figured, and this was honestly my sort of big rebellious move of my career that in some ways was the basis of the whole thing, and just tying it back to the whole Hayes Jason character dynamic. The funny thing about me was that, and Hayes, again, I'll be forever grateful. You helped me find this about myself. I am neurotic and I worry and I procrastinate in every way in my life, except when it comes to this. You tell the story about me hustling around that comedy room with the plan to how to win the vote to get the money for our film. Well, based on everything you've heard about me so far, does that sound like me at all? Like
No.
you helped me find the thing that motivated me out of my shell in a way.
The chutzpah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then this was the second example of it with Giants, where I was like, screw it. I'll make the whole thing. If they're mad at me, they're mad at me. I have never behaved that way in my life. But when it came to this, I was inspired to do so. I suddenly felt like I could pull it off. And that was the miracle of that moment, you know? And so that's what happened. I went and I did Giants of Radio. I shot the entire pilot. I turned in the entire pilot, finished 22 minutes, like ready to go. Certain people at the studio were upset about that, but generally they were like, holy shit, this is amazing and we're excited. And they sent it around to the networks, and the networks did a bidding war over the finished thing. And this is what's so weird, I've never heard of this before or since. They paid 20th, not me, I had nothing to do with this, but they paid 20th, CBS did, $1.5 million for, remember we made it for $150,000. They paid them $1.5 million for the right to consider it for their fall schedule, as if they had made it as one of their pilots. In their mind, their pilots normally cost them $3 million. So like $1.5 million was like cheap. You know what I mean? But like from 20th's point of view, they just turned the 150 into $1.5 million. Anyway, it was another interesting case study. Didn't end up getting picked up, but the Hollywood Reporter started sniffing around, and they asked the studio, where did this thing come from? And the studio there was some like fishy math that they didn't want to account for, and the fact that they had sort of shoveled this money off onto a third-party production company, which was all a little like on the line in terms of what was okay.
Unions and such.
Exactly. So what they said was that they gave me the money as a script fee, the $150,000, and that I, completely unbeknownst to them, shot a pilot out of it. And that story ran in the Hollywood Reporter, and that makes me sound like such a boss. Like, number one, that anybody would pay me at that point in my career $150,000 to write a script is totally insane, number one. And number two, that then I would take that money and just bet it on black, essentially. And so that the legend around Giants of Radio, again, even though it didn't go to series, became like a thing. And I got to do another one of those at a slightly higher like budget level. We did it for ABC. It was called This Might Hurt. We like built an actual set this time. Lots of great people were in it. It almost went to series, and in fact was ordered for 10 episodes for summer. This was in 2007 or 8. When was the economic meltdown? Because eight. So it was the summer of 2008. They called the studio and said, we're going to pick it up for 10 episodes. We're going to call you back tomorrow and make it official. And the studio called me and they said, you did it, man. Your weird improv pilot that we don't understand how you made is going to go to series, 10 episodes. They're going to do it as an experimental thing for summer. And during that time, while they were talking about it, picking it up, the finished product, This Might Hurt. This Might Hurt was about a multi-specialty private practice doctor's office. So it was an improv comedy about a doctor's office, essentially.
Yeah.
I later learned never title something how you might feel about it later. so that it's to give you a little foreshadowing where this story is heading. But so This Might Hurt was really my baby. Seemed like it was going to be the thing, on the verge of going at ABC. And while it's on the verge of going, I had this meeting with TV legends Steve Levitan and Christopher Lloyd, who at that point had written a pilot for ABC that was called My American Family. And I was so excited to meet them because I really admired them and admired their work. But I didn't think I could actually direct this pilot because everybody was telling me that This Might Hurt was going to go to series. They wanted to meet with me because they had seen This Might Hurt. They were impressed that I had written it, such that I had sort of written it. Again, outline, not script. And they wanted to talk to me about My American Family. I love the meeting, but like, you can't fake this. In the meeting, I said, I love you guys. This script is amazing, but chances are I can't do this. Which is like literally the best thing you could say in a job interview, right? It's like, so okay.
Showbiz people love only what they can't have.
So cut back to getting the phone call from the studio. This Might Hurt is going to go for 10 episodes. They're going to call tomorrow to make it official. Well, I knew enough at that point to say, I am not celebrating until I call to hear them make it official, right? So the next day, there's a story in the trades about how because of the economic meltdown, Disney is being forced to lay off 500 people. And instead of the call to pick up This Might Hurt, we get a call saying, we're so sorry. We know we've been negotiating on this for weeks and weeks. We know we told you yes yesterday, but given the layoffs, we just can't announce that we're doing this exciting experimental summer series in the face of just bad PR. So we've changed our minds. We're not going to pick it up. And it was the biggest heartbreak of my career at that point. And I had to pivot. And I called Steve Levitan and I said, it turns out This Might Hurt isn't going to go. Are you guys still looking for a director for that pilot? And he said, we've been holding it open for you. And that afternoon, I went in to start casting My American Family with them. And that's the pilot that turned into Modern Family.
It was incredible. And that cast, too. I mean, the cast is so incredibly talented, but they weren't the obvious choices to put in that show at that time. And you think of This Might Hurt and Eric Stonestreet being a buddy of ours at the time, how he got that role. Julie Bowen being pregnant at that time, and you shooting her, what would you guys use, a laundry basket that she could carry to hide her stomach? Like it was just threading the needle with that cast.
Yeah, I mean, Julie Bowen is so fucking talented, so funny, but I'm shocked that she just didn't lose the part because of the pregnancy. Yeah, I'm shocked.
It was an odyssey. The whole casting process. You mentioned Eric, so Eric was in This Might Hurt. Eric was our buddy from improv in Chicago, and he played a character in This Might Hurt. He kind of stole it, called Sad Brad. Okay. I had written the part for him with him in mind, and he was so funny. He was like the big guest star of it. And at the time, I started casting Modern Family with Steve and Chris. They had already auditioned Eric for the role of Cam. And his audition went well, but it wasn't a slam dunk. And he was like in a folder. I remember getting this like folder of people we kind of like. And they were like, why don't you go through their tapes and see if there's anybody you think we should bring back? And I was like, well, I know Eric. I know how great he is. We should definitely bring him back. At least maybe I'll work with him. We'll see. Through nothing I did, Eric, between the time of that first audition and the time he came back in for us, a light bulb had gone off that the character was his mother. He didn't have that idea. He didn't have that idea when he first read it. So now he comes back in, and the character is this fully formed, living creature that we came to know and love as Cam. And we're all like, oh my God, this is it.
It's so fun. He's playing his mom.
He's playing his mom.
He's not playing some version of whatever people think something is.
Right.
Doing his mom.
That's
so
why
good.
It got so real and so specific. And he had so many details of the character. And he just had, at that point, they had already cast Jesse Tyler Ferguson. He was already on board. So like it was all about the chemistry of the two of them, and it was brilliant.
Interesting time too. You got in that piece of casting right before the social change in Hollywood where you would have to be gay to get that part.
That's right. It's true. It's interesting.
It's I mean, that's true now, don't you think? Like if you were to cast a gay couple, you would have to cast two gay people.
I think that is true. But look, at the time there wasn't a gay couple. I mean, look, Will and Grace it existed. I don't want to take anything away from that, the trailblazing of that. But presenting a happy domestic partnership as parents was very new to American society at that time.
God.
In that for broadcast television. Yeah. And so yes, and so there's some ways you watch the show now on Disney Plus, on Peacock, or on Hulu. It's on 3 different streaming services. And sometimes it's still on broadcast television. And you there's elements of the show that you're like, wow, I'm not sure we could do that joke right now even. So that's walking a line. But I think that's what the writers always did so brilliantly. They pushed the envelope inside something that still felt so warm and so relatable.
I feel like you can. People often ask me, like, can you do that joke that you guys did, or this joke or that joke? And I'm like, you can do the joke now if you're willing to walk up to the podium and say, yeah, I did that joke. Like there's a thing. I mean, the hard part about doing some of these racier jokes is the social philosophy of the studio.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of the jokes that we think are too edgy for that sort of machine to accept, we just don't put on the paper.
Yeah.
And then we get live, we shoot it, and we shoot it in a way that, it works, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then we put it in, we go, and the audience laughs, and you go, well, I'll walk up to the podium and defend that joke.
Yeah.
Like there's still a way to do it. I think the danger is not to do the jokes.
Yeah.
I think it's like it's a bad move to just go, oh, we can't do that joke, even though you know a good way to do it.
And at the same time, I think it's the responsibility of society and by extension, comedy to evolve. We're all moving towards being more enlightened as a species and more intelligent and more aware. And so why shouldn't comedy also evolve? You know, we look back and we see language and we see jokes that were hurtful. You look at comedians in the 50s, you would never in a million years say the words, you know, that were used or tell the jokes or use the same perspective. And that is good, in my opinion. It's good that we have evolved and we have learned. I'm not vilifying those comedians for their perspective at the time. I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm just saying it's good that we've all grown as a society, and it's okay to work a little harder as comedians, as writers, as storytellers to be aware of other people's perspectives.
I 100% agree with that. I just am talking about that dark, ridiculous, incredible joke in the writer's room where you go, wow, that's the actual flaming heart of the joke.
Yes.
And you go, oh, we can't do that. You're like, well, maybe, you know, then you have to figure out a way to try to expose that thing,
yes,
in a way that works today, but still is not that 50s.
Well, but also not to evolve, like you were saying, Jason, but not to deny the fact that people relate to each other by making fun of people who love each other relate to each other by making fun of their differences. And I see this by the amount of white and brown jokes Jay and I make to each other all the time. And I look at the way my son and his friends relate to each other. They make fun of each other for their clothes, their weight, their haircuts, their height. They love each other and they have that chemistry. I think it's just the way it's done and the context of how people do it, because it almost feels, if you're not like acknowledging these differences that people have and making fun of them, then you're telling a different story.
I agree with you and I disagree with you. Okay, you're right. You're right. There's a context. But believe it or not, what you're saying, the notion that we express love by making fun or poking fun, that isn't an absolute truth. And I'm telling you that from experience. And
it doesn't have to be you could write poetry to each other too. There's multiple ways to do it.
I'm just saying, I grew up in comedy to a degree, and you know, whether it was I didn't consciously, I wasn't a stand-up. And this, by the way, this could be a fundamental worldview difference between somebody who was educated in improv versus somebody who cut their teeth in stand-up. Because improv is all about agreement. It's all about teamwork. It's all about comedic dynamics. Those dynamics don't necessarily include the idea of poking fun. Of making fun. I realize that that's how you're using your son as an example. I'm just using myself as an example. I did not relate to that type of humor as a kid. I didn't have friendships based on it, and it actually isolated me to a degree. I didn't know how to do that. I was way too sensitive for it. And I still evolved a career in comedy. And I still, to this day, have a career in comedy. My worldview does not come from that, from that notion of me. Now, I'm interested in it, and I've developed a thicker skin about it as I've gotten older. But I have to be honest, I put on I put it on as a way because I understand that guys, especially, relate to each other that way. But it's not natural to me.
It's so natural to me. I can't imagine another way. Like I like the inner workings of Broken Lizard they would seem brutal to somebody witnessing it, but they're I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's just simply the way we communicate.
Right.
And I mean, and we love it. I mean, we love it.
I think it's all about fathers and sons. It's all about it is a
Wait, what do you mean by that? The way that the father and the son relate to each other becomes
Yes.
your model for how you relate to other friends?
That's
Okay.
right. That's
Yeah.
what I'm suggesting.
Yeah.
I just happen to have a father that I mean, he's amazing. And he's funny, but he's also a sensitive dude. And he just never that wasn't I grew up, I think both my parents are very funny in different kinds of ways, but the notion of giving shit was not one of them. That was not part of my childhood lexicon.
Yeah.
And I understand that is most comedians and most guys have that as like a source of their bonding. But like I view it like anthropologically. I don't do that.
Yeah,
is that weird?
It's not your lane. Like
It's not
you
my
do
lane.
what you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. That makes perfect sense.
I know we were having a conversation more about comedy, and I do understand what you're saying, Jay, about like, especially the writer's room. The writer's room has to be a safe space where you can say the darkest of things. It's like that's the way you get to you have to be able to be ultimately free to go too far to be able to find that magical joke that makes the show. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. I mean, there is this thing about stand up and to a degree R-rated movies where the audience gets to watch the people say the thing that they've thought about but they're not allowed to say. Like
Yes.
there's a thrill of that.
yes,
And
I agree with you.
without that, ultimately, like the great thing about American entertainment is, it's ballsy and brash and smart and risky.
Yes,
American
yes,
comedy.
yes.
And we, we have to find a way to preserve that spirit. Otherwise,
I agree.
we're gonna be
I don't
Canadian
think.
comedy.
I don't. There's
Sorry,
some great Canadian
sorry.
comedy.
I know. I'm kidding. I love Canada. I'm about to go there for a month. I love you people.
Well, wait, but on that, Jason talked because it came out, I think, a year ago. I watched it with my kids. The world building that you did. So you went from a $20,000 short film about the
Yeah.
LA bar scenes to your latest thing, or maybe not your latest, but one of the things you've done recently is you created an entire world based around Christmas and the North Pole.
It's
so
sort of an odd thing for a Jewish guy to have done, but yes, yeah,
he's the guy to do it. What was the story? He said, you want me to do this?
yeah, it was like that. You're talking about the Santa Clauses with Tim Allen, which I did for Disney Plus. It's obviously a big movie franchise, and it was really important to Disney, and they really wanted to make it into a series for Disney Plus, but it required a massive lift in terms of figuring out how to accomplish the world building that Hayes is talking about. There's a real specific mythology that's set up within the movies that we wanted to honor, and at the same time, we had to figure out how to do this world on a TV budget, which involved using the volume, which is the big volumetric screen. It's more than a screen. It's a 270-degree immersive LED environment that you create 3D sets on and then use as your backgrounds. And it really is honestly the way of the future, especially when shooting fantasy.
Wait, is that stuff there, or is it created in post?
It's
the set.
It's created in prep.
Oh, wow.
But is it tangible?
No.
Whoa. Really?
Yeah.
Well, you bump into the screen.
You bump into the screen. The screen is tangible, but the set itself is a completely immersive, three-dimensional environment that is on the screen and tracked to the camera. So here's the incredible trick of it. As you move the camera, the objects on the screen shift in 3 dimensions in the same way they would to your eye. So,
Right. So you're looking around, you see things from different angles.
Yes.
and light-
yes.
Is there
way the
also a
light hits it.
foreground? There must be a foreground set, right?
Yes, there is a foreground set, and as a director, you've just pointed to the trick of the whole thing is that you have to have real things in the foreground. It's better to shoot it on longer lenses with real things in the foreground. And so there's a great degree of foreground set, but you have to, there's a lot of math to it. There's a lot of planning to it. It's ILM that developed this along with Jon Favreau. They built it for The Mandalorian, and since that, it's exploded. It's in so many shows you don't even know it. It's obviously all the Star Wars shows you see on Disney Plus are done using this technology, and more. The Batman, the most recent one, was done. I mean, I would say 60% of the movie is on the volume. It's incredible. But I wanted to use this technology. I wanted to sort of like understand it, and I wanted to work with visual effects in a way that I had never worked before. And I think learning the world building and mythology behind the series, which I really didn't honestly appreciate until I was in it, and saying, oh wait, the elves are played by children, but they're 800 years old, and the North Pole is actually in a bubble underground, and we have to design what that looks like. It's in another dimension, and then we get to come up with reasons how, like, it was a real fun sci-fi comedy exercise that I hadn't gotten to do before, and I think we made something really, really fun out of it. And yeah, that was the other, if you want to talk about the career as polls in terms of Modern Family, and then that most recently, and in between, everything from Single Parents, which we worked on together, Jay, right?
That's right.
And
That's right.
Life in Pieces, The Big Leap, which is a drama I did for Fox. I'm super proud of, but that was possibly the best reviewed thing of my career. New York Times. We got raves calling it a perfect 11 episodes, and no one watched it. Literally just an absolute flatline.
The Big Leap was not the Quantum Leap reboot, right?
No, it was not.
No, this is it was a different show. It was a dance, a world of dance, right?
Yeah, it was a show written by Liz Heldens, who was the showrunner on Friday Night Lights and is currently the showrunner and creator of Will Trent. She's incredible, and she wrote this show that was really about a bunch of real people struggling in different ways, different ages, different places in life, who all had a long ago connection with dance, and this potentially life-ruining reality show about dance comes to town. They all audition and end up on the show, and it was a soap, essentially, about the lives of these people that were being intruded upon by this reality show. But at the same time, they were also reconnecting with their sort of creative core from way back when. The show, the magic of it was that it was actually quite funny, which is why they wanted me to direct it, because it was a drama and it was very visual, and the dancing was so much fun to shoot. But the tone of it was very, I don't know, cheeky. Is that a good word? It's not a good word.
No. Well, it's what good storytelling is, right? You take serious stuff with people who care, trying to do something, and you make a little light of it as you go.
That's right. That's right. So anyway, that's the span of it. But yeah, I made a couple movies along the way. But it's all been. Hayes was in one recently. I made a little movie in Brooklyn. This was an incredible experience about 5 or 6 years ago with Martin Freeman, Morena Baccarin, Jake Lacey, and one Hayes MacArthur. Not to mention Melissa Rauch.
It was amazing to see, because you the DP, Jay, who shot our short film, David Jones, who's a great friend and super talented guy, ended up. I then found myself back with these guys in Brooklyn shooting this big fun movie. Some decades later, it was amazing.
Thank you for calling it big. We made it for a absolutely tiny budget, and we're scraping and fighting just to get it done. We made it for what they call Tier 0, which which means, it was a union production, but it was, in order to get anybody to work for tier 0 rates, you basically have to offer them the job above whatever they've done before. Basically everybody is doing it for the experience, and nobody behind the scenes has done the job before. Right. So it's a lot of teaching, and thank God that I had David Jones, my longtime DP since Big Handsome Guy, shooting. And of course, the movie got a small theatrical release through IFC Films, and then it was on Showtime for a long time. And for a period of time there, if you took a cross-country flight, there was no way that wasn't a top option for you. Ode to Joy, the movie was called. I'm very, very proud of that little movie.
So, dude, what television, film, and then this changing landscape of what's happening with everything, with the streamers and studios and stuff. What are you keying in? Like, where do you want to tell your stories next? What's happening?
It's wild, man. Obviously, and Jay, I don't know how you're feeling about this haze, how it's impacted you, but like, we're in a business, this notion of visual storytelling. So I'm going to exclude podcasting, what we're doing right now. But the idea of narrative storytelling in particular has been a growth industry since the invention of celluloid. Literally, you think about it. It's a line straight up until 3 years ago. And now we're in a rapid and sudden decline, and it feels crazy from the perspective of a narrative storyteller. Now, from the perspective of a podcaster or somebody just coming up trying to make a film or just coming up trying to make a short, I would say the world is their oyster. There are infinite options for distribution, because I think what it is that the studios no longer control that means of distribution.
So you're talking about the distribution means, but the storytelling, if you're setting out to make something, the fundamentals of that stay the same. It's just everything that's happening externally around it is radically different.
There was a moment over the past, I don't know, let's call it a decade. I looked up one year, like how many new shows were made, and it was, I think it was 512. And you're like, who the fuck is going to watch all these shows? Like I for a while, I used to get mad at the internet at people who had no talent, who had millions of followers. I'm like, listen, I'm the famous one. Watch my stuff and sit quietly and get off this fucking nonsense internet. And it's the problem is we're competing with, like hot babes who walk around, and I love that. I like watching that. I like spending my time watching that. But that's the thing we're competing against. Like, you're like, The good news, I think, though, is that there was a correction from the peak, which is 500 new shows. Now there are, very few new shows. But we have these big companies, that exist with only one thing to do, which is put out the shit we make.
Yeah.
They have to do that, or else they have to cease to exist. And so while it's a terrible moment now, in the fall, they're all going to get their new budgets back, and they're going to fucking start making some shows again, in my opinion. That's what I imagine is going to happen. And it's not going to be at the same level, but, it's going to happen. It has to happen.
I'm going to choose to believe you.
What, you think show business is going to be over? It's not over. I mean, the people must be entertained, right?
I agree. I just think we're in the midst of a kind of permanent correction. Like, not a temporary correction. It was sort of an overdue one. As you pointed out, the 512 shows, I think it got up to 700 something at the actual peak, what we call, what was coined peak TV. And it was too much. It was too much. It was more supply than demand. So we're now going back to the level of the demand. The problem is that I think the demand is not going to grow. The demand is actually going to continue to shrink. And that's what's worrisome, because of the shifting habits and our shifting attention spans. But this has been the case for a long time. I'm just, again, talking from personal experience. I remember over the pandemic, like the feeling of like, okay, you're cooped up, you need to be entertained. right? And you like turn on the TV, and I remember feeling like starting a new show, engaging with a new piece of narrative entertainment at home in the comfort of your own home felt like a heavy lift. Did you have that feeling? Like, oh, I got to start a new thing. I got to engage with a new thing, as opposed to this, where, let's picture my kids there, popped up for a second. But the phone has changed our attention spans. YouTube has changed our attention spans. It's given us an option that's a much lighter kind of popcorn. And I'm just not sure that the longer form narrative entertainment will continue to exist when we choose to engage with it. But now that there's a whole different kind of series of choices, I'm not sure that it will ever exist at a similar level as to what it was, a few years ago.
Part of the problem, and I think this is good news, is that the streaming services are large, except for Netflix, maybe Disney, are losing money. And I think that's great news because what it means is that this, this way of just putting it out there, just there's no press, there's no money behind it. That didn't turn out to be a very profitable way for them to make entertainment.
Yeah.
And so if there's fewer shows, but there's going to have to be some way of monetizing this shit, or else it's not going to exist. And I know this is insane to say, but I mean, they're going to have to figure out ways, whether it's cutting the price of the ticket, or adjusting the things that come out theatrically. They're going to have to. It's going to have to go somewhat back to the old system, which I realize maybe we've all moved on, but the streaming service thing is not going to. It's losing money. They're not going to continue to do it, and so perhaps the market will drive us back. Like if you can't watch a show on streaming, if the only way you're going to be a movie, your only way you're going to be able to see it is in the theater, people are going to start to shift their behavior again.
Yeah.
Based on the market.
Yeah.
It's hopeful,
look,
I know. It's hopeful,
no, but we are, look, the fact is we're in the middle of a big change change is uncomfortable. And these kinds of changes and shifts have happened before. We're living through one clearly right now. We're not exactly sure where all the chips are going to fall. And in the midst of it, just to go back to your initial question, how am I approaching it? Like, I'm just trying to double down on the things that I care most about, like the things that I'm really, truly drawn to creatively. It's not necessarily things that people would expect based on like the comedy career I've had so far. Like, I have a movie that's like a straight up thriller that I'm dying to make. Like that's like, it really has something to say about our current media environment and is like an absolute nail biter. We're trying to put that together right now. I have a documentary about Shakespeare that I really want to make. Then on the flip side, here at my company, we have this cool low budget comedy production initiative that we've put together. That's an attempt to get back to our roots, and specifically the big handsome guy roots, the do-it-yourself roots, and to connect with the next generation of multi-hyphenate storytellers that are doing those kinds of things, basically to try and find the next Jason and Hayes, if you will, that are hungry and coming up and maybe 75% of the way there, but have no experience engaging with the behemoth of these companies that we engage with and have now, created a degree of a career interfacing with. So we're trying to put that together. It's all stuff that I'm really like truly passionate about, that pushes in a different kind of direction, and that also hopefully has something to say about the world at the same time as being funny.
Should we vouch?
Yeah, that Jason's. I can vouch first because to Jason's point, that you're looking for that connection in a storytelling form.
Yeah,
and the way it comes out is one thing, but you're competing against things that aren't really stories, right? Like the clips that we watch and things like that, to have an earned moment, when you would tear up watching an episode of Modern Family sometimes, you had to watch the whole episode to get that emotion of that moment, and then you were more invested in it.
That's right.
And I don't think that goes away. If people are really looking for that experience, I think it'll go away because it's a different feeling we're getting from these other types of media. But I don't know anything about any of that. But I did read a good book that came out a long time ago, and it got turned into a movie. I just slept on it. It's called Lone Survivor, and it's the story of Marcus Luttrell, who was a Navy SEAL who survived an incredible harrowing event in Afghanistan. And the reason that I'm keying in on it now is because I work with a charity called Higher Ground, and I started as a volunteer. Now I work on the board of it, and we service veterans, men and women who served in the military and first responders on one side, and then we take people with disabilities on the other, and it's outdoor stuff we do with them, things that they would never be able to do, like fly fish, kayak, snow ski. And we take people from all over the country and we bring them up to the mountains. And it's just every time you're around these groups of people coming from, and they get to bring their partners or spouses with them to do it as well. They have these it's recreational therapy at its core. And there's an event coming up next week, which is like the big gala for it. And Marcus Luttrell is sharing his story for this, what is ultimately a fundraiser. But one of the things that's interesting about what Marcus is doing is other people have spoken at this event before, from generals to admirals to Secretary of Defenses. There's always a big speaker at it, and they come with a speech. Here's my thing, and they, whether it's 5 minutes or a half hour. But in getting Marcus to do this event, one of his things is he only wants to do it in the form of a question and answer, which is really, I come to it because any war story that's told is a reluctant one. No one wants to have a story of what happened in war. I grew up with war stories for over the table of a Denny's restaurant in Barrington, Illinois, because my grandfather was a POW in World War II. He was a tail gunner that got shot down, and as he liked to call it, he was a guest of Mr. Hitler for 13 months, in Stalag 3. I've told the story to Jay before in the podcast. But those stories that I got out of him, he didn't sit me down on his knee and say, hey, here's a war story you need to hear about. I would ask, my brother and I would ask around, and then he would tell the story. And so Marcus is coming up here to tell his story of Lone Survivor. And it's just something that if you don't know the story of what was happening at the time in Afghanistan and what he went through, and it's an amazing story. So I'm vouching for Lone Survivor.
Have you seen the film?
No, I haven't seen it.
It's really good. Like, yeah. It's like this guy is really left alone in a real rough situation with a lot of Afghani enemies out there. It's rough.
It's funny because we only experience stuff that happens, especially in war, through the lens of media right now, like specifically news. We don't hear like long form, heartfelt stories of what happened behind the events. More importantly, like what shaped the person that found themselves in this event.
Yeah.
It's.
This is going to sound glib, but did your grandfather ever see Hogan's Heroes?
No, I don't know if he did. We never talked about it. We talked about MASH because MASH is one of my favorites because it's a comedy with the highest stakes possible. Yeah. And it speaks to the way doctors have to use this thick skin, or medical professionals, to get through the darkness of what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I used to talk to him about MASH because I just thought it was brilliant. You were only inside the tents, right? But the war was all happening on the outside, so you felt it. But no, Hogan's Heroes was, who makes a comedy about a prison camp? That was amazing. It's incredible. Yeah. Right? Yeah.
Some of the best comedy exists around that darkness. Just to tie it back to some of our earlier conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the movie Life is Beautiful? The movie that took place in the Nazi prison camp. I showed that to my kids they loved it. I mean, you wouldn't know what's happening, but it's just this one father trying to keep his kids happy and making an atrocious, dark situation fun for them, because that's what they were going to remember. And it's funny and beautiful. Yeah. So that's
I'm going to vouch for, I don't know. I've realized I've never seen a Billy Wilder film. And it's in a way, like my wife wanted to watch this movie called Roman Holiday, which, she came to my wife kind of looks like Audrey Hepburn, and she came to my Halloween party dressed as Audrey Hepburn, and years ago. And she's always had this, fascination with Audrey Hepburn. And I think this is true about Hollywood stardom, is that, the reason it's harder for a guy who looks like me to star in a movie is because the audience looks up and they go, "Oh, that doesn't look like me. Hayes looks like me," right? So it's this thing I've always thought about Audrey Hepburn and my wife, and finally I see this movie. Last night we sat down and watched Roman Holiday, and it's about, she's a princess who is just sick of all the glad handing and all the bullshit she's got to do, and she's throwing a fit, and the doctor comes in and injects her with some stuff to make her sleep, and she kind of is like fucked up, and she escapes this Italian castle. She's an English princess visiting Italy, and she just goes out into the streets, and she's hammered, and she falls asleep on the bench, and Gregory Peck finds her, and he's trying to put her in a cab, but she doesn't know where to go. The cab driver doesn't want her, and he goes, "Oh, fuck it." So he takes her to his apartment, and he puts her down on the couch. He goes, "You can sleep on the couch, you can't sleep on the bed." He goes out to get coffee, he comes back, and she's in the bed, and it's like this, it's this romantic comedy, right? And it's, the timing of it is from that era. It's a black and white film, but it's what we do. Like it's the early versions of what we now do. And you can see the pacing of it is quite, you would call it in many ways quite slow, although they have two shots that really work. And I kind of, when I look at, for example, Super Troopers, I'm like, there's about 3 or 4 minutes to come out of that film. Right. And I know, when you experience, like we keep accelerating the pace, right? Everything's accelerated. And you guys at Modern Family are like very accelerated pace, right? And which is driven by 22 minutes in part 2, right?
Yeah.
But we watch this film, and it's a really well done movie, good rhythm, good, without really talking about the fact that there's this, 18-year-old who's barely conscious in Gregory Peck's apartment. They don't really go into boy, that's a really sexually dangerous situation here.
Right.
Because he's quite a gentleman, but you can feel it. You can feel it. It's the things that they weren't allowed to do back in those days that we might handle a little differently now. But it's a good movie.
So you're saying we should remake it?
We should remake. I mean,
right? That's what you're saying, right?
By the way, if Roman Holiday right now, if you remade, it would kill because I have 2 daughters and a wife, and regardless of how educated and highfalutin their education is, they're still fascinated with this princess thing. And if you make the right princess movie, I think it would kill. I won't do it, but it's the same view as that. The producer at Caddyshack called me once, and he goes, we're making another Caddyshack. You're directing. I'll get Danny. I'll get Billy. And I'm like, look, I said, if we make another Caddyshack, they're going to hang me from the Hollywood sign, and I'll buy the rope. And I said, let's make an original golf movie. He goes, nah, hell, we're not doing that. But anyway, I'm not remaking Roman Holiday.
Good. Well, I'm glad we cleared that up. Thank you for inviting me to join you in your vouching process. I am going to vouch. I mentioned this Shakespeare thing I want to make, so I'm gonna vouch for this book called "Shakespeare Was a Woman and Other Heresies: How Doubting the Bard Became the Biggest Taboo in Literature." It's by Elizabeth Winkler. It would, you know how like we now know that certain parts of the history we were taught as kids was just incorrect. Like Columbus was not welcomed with open arms. They didn't want him here. Like, but we were taught the opposite. Well, this is like one of those things. It's like, now look, there's a lot of heated controversy about this. And in some ways, this book is about the controversy. But Shakespeare, the gentleman we were taught was Shakespeare, the man from Stratford upon Avon. Turns out he only had a 5th grade education. He never left the island of England, which is significant because many of Shakespeare's plays were specifically about other places in Europe, most notably 7 plays about specific cities in Italy that specifically reference works of art that could have only been seen with the naked eye had you gone to those cities. We know that this man from Stratford, we have his tax records, for example, and he never claimed any income from writing. No writers at the time acknowledged that he was a writer in any way. He had 2 children. His children were illiterate. Could you imagine that the person who wrote Shakespeare's children would be left illiterate? There's so much about it that doesn't add up. And there's many people that have questioned it going all the way back to the time. And what this book tracks is the time. It tracks the conversation around the man from Stratford not being the actual author, and shows you how that conversation began while the plays were being performed in the 1500s. It's not a recent conversation. There's allusions to it being a pseudonym that go all the way back there. This book also traces the history of how the man from Stratford, why it became a very useful idea to the crown, to England, to the aristocracy, to pump up this notion of the common man genius. How the idea that this dude was essentially, immaculately gifted without any formal education, the greatest works of literature in the English language, how that was a very appealing idea to the proletariat, to the common people of England, and how that idea took root and how it benefited the crown to keep emphasizing it, and then how industries sprung up around the notion of this man from Stratford having been the author. It's very fascinating. And for me, it just triggers this idea of like, have we been lied to? Is this another thing in our education that is just like wrong? Like, have we been told a story that's being told to us because long ago it benefited someone else to make us believe that?
So is it conspiratorial?
I think that word is pejorative a little bit. Like, I don't view it that way. I view it as an unearthing of some old untold stories and some history and some perspectives that haven't been shown a light. And Elizabeth Winkler the author is an English scholar, and she wrote an article in the Atlantic that kind of began her journey with this, where she speculated that perhaps Shakespeare was a woman because his characters were so sort of unimaginably insightful when it came to the way that they rendered female characters. And no man prior to that had ever come close to that level of insight. And then no man did for hundreds of years after. So she was rightly asking the question, and in posing the question like that, she got death threats. And she was like, wow, this really triggers something in people. Why does it trigger something in people like this? And thus began her investigation of the whole conversation around this subject, which this book explores.
Well, it's the myths, like the myth of Columbus. I mean, the truth of, Columbus arrived on that island and claimed he had arrived in India because
Right.
he didn't want to admit that he'd fucked up. So much so that Cuba became known as China for about 50 years. They were calling Cuba China because they're like, well, if this is India, that must be China. This motherfucker wouldn't admit he fucked up. And that's strange, right? And it's the American, the whole myth of America is sort of wrapped around this story that apparently wasn't true. And I'm attached to these myths in some way. They comfort me. And I think, it's like when you go after Kennedy, I'm like, it doesn't make me comfortable. I'm like a little more comfortable with the myth. And so when you hear about Shakespeare being a woman, you're like, what else is going on? What else don't I know?
To be clear, in some ways, she debunks her own suggestion that Shakespeare was a woman. The article suggested that by the time she wrote the book, she doesn't believe that anymore. She believes something else, but I'll leave that in case you want to investigate it.
Yeah.
We can end it with this. No longer mourn for me when I am dead, then you shall hear the surly sullen bell give warning to the world that I have fled from this vile world with vilest worms to dwell. Nay, as you read this line, remember not the hand that writ it, for I love you so, that I and your sweet thoughts should be forgot, if thinking on me should bring you woe. Oh, if I say you look upon this verse, when I perhaps compounded them with clay, do not so much as my poor name rehearse, but let your love even with my life decay, lest the wise world will look into your moan and mock you with me after I am gone. You walked me into a soliloquy, Jay.
Wow.
I mean, I had to do it.
Number one, I'm so psyched that you just did that. And now I get to ask the question. I get to pose the question. Doesn't that sound like somebody who knew that they were about to disappear themselves from the earth? Remember?
No, that's exactly the premise of that is I'm leaving. Don't get sad. Don't let the world look at you and make fun of your grief. I'm out of here.
Remember not the hand who writ it.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something. This is my point. Once you start unearthing these stories, and then you look back at Shakespeare, you're like, oh my God, he was telling us. The whole story is in there.
Uh-huh.
It's incredible.
I'm going to
love it.
I love it.
Thank you, Jason. We appreciate it, pal.
Thank you. This was so fun.
So fun.
Thanks, Jay. Bye, guys.
Mustache Tales.